Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Cretaceous Past by Cixin Liu. Narrated by B.J. Harrison. Prologue. If the entire history of the Earth were condensed into a single day, 1 hour would equate to 200 million years, 1 minute to 3.3 million years, and 1 second to 55,000 years. Life would appear as early as 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, but human civilization would not emerge until the last tenth of the last second of the day. From the time that philosophers held the first debate on the steps of an ancient Greek temple, that slaves laid the first stone in the foundation of the Great Pyramid, that Confucius accepted his first disciple in a candlelit thatched hut, until you turned the first page of this book, only 1/10 of a tick of the clock would elapse. But in the hours before this 10th of a second, what was life on Earth doing? Were other organisms merely swimming, running, breeding, and sleeping? Were they always so very stupid for billions of years? Of the countless branches on the tree of life, has the light of intelligence graced our small twig alone? That seems unlikely. But for a seed of intelligence to grow into a great civilization is no easy feat. It requires that many conditions be met simultaneously, a 1 in a million coincidence. Nascent intelligence, after all, is like a small flame in an open field, liable to be snuffed out by a gentle breeze from any direction. Even if it sets the surrounding weeds alight, the little fire will quickly find its path blocked by an empty clearing or stream and die out without a sound. In the event that it grows into a large wildfire, the odds are that a heavy rainstorm will put it out. In short, the likelihood of a flame becoming a blazing conflagration is very low. We can imagine that, over the long history of evolution, budding intelligences once flickered in and out of the endless night of antiquity like the lights of fireflies. At approximately 20 minutes to midnight, that is, approximately 20 minutes before our arrival, 2 intelligent flames appeared on Earth. This 20-minute period was by no means brief. It was equivalent to more than 60 million years, an era so distant as to be beyond your imagination. Humanity's ancestors would not emerge for another few tens of millions of years. There were no people back then, and even the continents were shaped very differently than they are today. On the geologic timescale, it was the late Cretaceous period. At that time, gigantic animals called dinosaurs inhabited the Earth. There were many different types of dinosaurs, and most of them were very large. The heaviest weighed 80 tons, as much as 800 people, and the tallest grew to 30 meters, or as tall as 4-story buildings. They had already lived on Earth for 70 million years, which is to say that they appeared on Earth more than 1 billion years ago from the present day. Compared to humanity's several 100,000 years on Earth, 70 million years is a very long time indeed. Over such a long period, raindrops dripping steadily in the same location can carve through the earth, and a gentle breeze blowing continuously against a mountain can level it. A species undergoing constant evolution over the same span of time, no matter how stupid to begin with, will become intelligent. In the end, this is what happened to the dinosaurs. They uprooted large trees, stripped the trunks of branches and leaves, and tied large stones to the ends of these trunks with rattan. If the stone was round or square, it was a huge hammer, one capable of flattening one of our cars with a single blow. If the stone was flat, it was a huge axe. If the stone was pointed, it was a huge spear. When making spears, the dinosaurs would leave some of the branches on the tops of the trunks to stabilize them during flight. Their spears could be dozens of meters long, and they flew like dud missiles. The dinosaurs formed primitive tribes and dwelled in enormous caves they excavated themselves. They learned to use fire, preserving the embers left by lightning strikes to illuminate their caves or cook food. Oftentimes, the candles they used for light were entire pine trees, several arm spans around. They even wrote on the walls of their caves with charred tree trunks, recording in simple strokes how many eggs were laid yesterday and how many baby dinosaurs hatched today. More importantly, the dinosaurs already possessed a rudimentary language. To our ears, the conversations would have sounded like the whistling of trains. At the same time, another species on Earth was showing signs of budding intelligence: ants. Like the dinosaurs, by then, the ants had already undergone a long process of evolution. They raised cities on every continent, towering anthills or subterranean labyrinths. The scale of ant society far outstripped that of the dinosaur society. There were many kingdoms with populations exceeding 100 million ants, and these vast societies developed complex, tightly organized structures, humming along at a precise, machine-like pace. The ants communicated with each other using pheromones. These extremely sophisticated odor molecules could convey complex information, which endowed the ants with a more advanced language than that of the dinosaurs. Though the first glimmer of intelligence had appeared in two species on Earth, one great and one small, on the path to civilization, each was beset with fatal flaws and insurmountable obstacles. The dinosaurs' biggest disadvantage was that they lacked dexterous hands. Though their big, clumsy claws were matchless in a fight, one type of dinosaur, Deinonychus, had sharp, saber-like claws, which it used to disembowel other dinosaurs, and could make crude tools. They were incapable of performing delicate operations, manufacturing complex tools, or writing anything complicated. But manual dexterity is a prerequisite for developing civilization. Only when a species has versatile hands can a virtuous circle form between brain evolution and survival activities. In contrast to the dinosaurs, the ants could carry out incredibly delicate operations, and they built complex architecture, both above ground and underground. However, they lacked a certain diversity and richness in their thought. When a critical mass of ants gathered together, they exhibited a collective intelligence that was strict and rigid, much like a computer program. Guided by these programs, which developed over long periods of time, ant colonies built city after complex city. Ant society was like a large, precise piece of machinery, in which each individual ant was a mere cog. When one of these cogs was divorced from the machine, its thinking was extremely superficial and mechanical. But the creative thinking required by civilization is the province of individuals, our Newton and Einstein, for example. The simple redundancy of collective intelligence cannot give rise to elevated thought, just as 100 million of us humans, thinking as hard as possible, could not come up with the 3 laws of motion and theory of relativity. In the ordinary course of events, the respective societies of the ants and dinosaurs could not have continued to evolve. As has happened to countless species before and after, the flames of intelligence that had flared to life within these two species should have fizzled out in the waters of time, two fleeting glimmers of light in the long night of Earth's history. But then, a curious thing happened. Chapter 1. The First Encounter. It was an ordinary day in the late Cretaceous. It is impossible to determine the exact date, but it was truly an ordinary day, and Earth was at peace. Let us examine the shape of the world that day. At that time, the shape and position of the continents differed radically from their present forms. Antarctica and Australia formed a single landmass, larger than either continent is today. India was a large island in the Tethys Sea, and Europe and Asia were two separate landmasses. Dinosaur civilization was found predominantly on two supercontinents. The first, Gondwana, had been Earth's only continuous landmass several billion years earlier. It had since broken up, and its area was greatly reduced, but it was still as large as present-day Africa and South America combined. The second, Laurasia, was a continent that had split from Gondwana and would later come to form present-day North America. That day, on every continent, every creature was occupied with the business of survival. In this uncivilized world, they knew not where they came from, and cared not where they went. When the Cretaceous sun was directly overhead, and the shadows cast by the leaves of the cycads were at their smallest, their sole concern was where they would find their lunch for the day. One Tyrannosaurus rex had found its lunch. At that moment, it found itself in central Gondwana, in a sunlit clearing in a stand of tall sago palms. Its lunch was a large fleshy lizard, freshly caught. Using its large claws, it tore the still wriggling lizard into two halves and tossed the tail end into its gaping jaws. As it munched with relish, the dinosaur felt quite pleased with the world and its own life. Approximately 1 meter from the Tyrannosaurus' left foot was a small town of ants. Most of the town lay underground, providing a home for over 1,000 ants. The Tyrannosaurus' pursuit of the lizard in the clearing had caused a powerful earthquake in the town, but luckily it hadn't been trampled underfoot. The town's residents ran to the surface and looked up. From their perspective, the Tyrannosaurus occupied more than half of the sky, like a towering peak piercing the clouds. Standing in the mountain's shadow, the ants felt as though the sky had suddenly grown overcast. They watched as, high in the air, the first half of the lizard left the Tyrannosaurus' claws and entered its cavernous mouth. They listened to the sound of the dinosaur chewing, like thunder from the heavens. On previous occasions, this thunder was often accompanied by a heavy rain of splintered bones and chunks of flesh. These were the leftover scraps from the dinosaur's meal, and even a light drizzle would provide lunch for the entire town that day. But this Tyrannosaurus kept its mouth tightly closed, and nothing fell from the sky. After a moment, it tossed the other half of the lizard into its mouth. Thunder rumbled overhead again, but still the rain of bones and flesh held off. When the Tyrannosaurus had eaten, it took 2 steps backward and lay down contentedly for a nap in the shade. The ants watched the peak collapse and become a tall, distant mountain range. The earth shuddered, and brilliant sunlight flooded the plain once more. The ants shook their heads and sighed. The dry season was long this year, and life was getting harder with each passing day. They had already gone hungry for 2 days. Just as the crestfallen ants turned back toward the entrance to the town, another earthquake rocked the clearing. They looked back to see the mountain range rolling back and forth across the earth. As they watched, the Tyrannosaurus stuck one of its huge claws into its mouth and began to dig furiously between its teeth. Immediately they understood why the dinosaur could not sleep. Meat had gotten stuck between its teeth and was causing it discomfort. The mayor of the ant town had a sudden idea. It climbed onto a blade of grass and released a pheromone toward the colony below. Wherever the pheromone went, the ants understood the mayor's meaning and passed the message on. Antennae waved as a tide of excitement swept through the colony. The ants, led by the mayor, marched toward the Tyrannosaurus, forming several black streamlets on the ground. At first, that line of mountains seemed impossibly far away on the horizon, visible but unreachable. But then the Tyrannosaurus rolled over restlessly in their direction again, closing the gap between itself and the procession of ants in an instant. One of the dinosaur's huge claws fell from the sky and landed just ahead of the mayor with an earth-shaking crash. The impact lifted the entire procession clear off the ground, and the dust it raised rose before the ants like the mushroom cloud of an atom bomb. Without waiting for the dust to settle, the ants followed their mayor onto the dinosaur's claw. The dinosaur's palm was perpendicular to the ground, forming a rugged and uneven cliff. But to the ants, who excelled at climbing, this was no obstacle. They quickly climbed to the top of the cliff and onto the dinosaur's forearm. In the ant's eyes, the rough skin of the forearm was a plateau, crisscrossed by gullies and ravines. The procession wound through these ravines, across the upper arm, toward their ultimate goal, the dinosaur's maw. Just then, the Tyrannosaurus raised its huge claw to pick at its teeth again. The ants marching across its forearm felt the ground begin to tilt, followed by the sensation of increased gravity, and they clung to the ground to avoid being thrown off. The Tyrannosaurus's huge head took up half the sky, and its slow breathing was like the wind sweeping through the heavens. The huge pair of eyes peering down from on high made the ants tremble with fear. Spotting the ants on its forearm, the Tyrannosaurus raised its other arm to brush them off. Held aloft, its huge palm blotted out the midday sun like a storm cloud, and the plain on which the ant colony stood darkened at once. The ants stared up in horror at the palm in the sky, waving their antennae frantically. The mayor raised its front leg, and the others followed its example, pointing as one to the dinosaur's mouth. The dinosaur was stunned for a few seconds, until it finally grasped the ant's intention. After a moment of consideration, it lowered its raised arm. On the plane of its forearm, the clouds immediately parted, and the sun came out. The Tyrannosaurus opened its mouth wide and placed one clawed finger against its massive teeth, forming a bridge between its forearm and its jaws. For a moment, the ants hesitated. Then the mayor led the way forward along the finger, and the colony followed. One group of ants quickly reached the end of the finger. Standing on the smooth conical claw tip, they gazed into the dinosaur's mouth in awe. Before them was a nighttime world where a thunderstorm was brewing. A strong, damp wind, reeking of gore, blasted their faces. A thunder rumbled from the endless dark depths. When the ants' eyes adjusted to the gloom, they could faintly make out a large patch of even denser darkness in the distance, the borders of which kept changing shape. It took the ants a long time to realize that this was the dinosaur's throat. It was also the source of the rumbling thunder, which emanated from the Tyrannosaurus' stomach. The ants looked away in fright. Then, one by one, they climbed onto the dinosaur's huge teeth and crawled down the smooth white enamel cliffs. In the wide crevices between the teeth, they began to tear at the pink lizard flesh that was lodged there with their powerful mandibles. Now and then, an ant looked up as it chewed at the two enormous teeth piercing the sky on either side of it. Above them, on the dinosaur's palate, another row of teeth gleamed in the sunlight, slanting into its mouth, seeming as though they might come crashing down at any moment. The Tyrannosaurus had already moved its finger to its upper jaw, and an unbroken stream of ants continued to climb onto its teeth to devour the meat in between them, creating a mirror image of the scene on its lower jaw. Over 1,000 ants bustled about the dozen or so crevices between the dinosaur's teeth. Soon, the scraps of meat were picked clean. The discomfort between the Tyrannosaurus' teeth vanished. The dinosaur was not yet evolved enough to say thank you, so it merely let out a long sigh of satisfaction. A sudden hurricane scoured the 2 rows of teeth, blowing every last ant out. The colony drifted through the air like a cloud of black dust. Because their bodies were incredibly light, they landed unscathed about a meter from the Tyrannosaurus' head. With full stomachs, the ants walked back to the entrance of the town, thoroughly satiated. The Tyrannosaurus, having eliminated the discomfort between its teeth, rolled over into the cool shade and fell into an easy sleep. And that was that. As the earth turned quietly, the sun slid silently toward the west. The shadows of the cycads grew longer. The butterflies and small insects flitted through the trees. In the distance, the waves of the primeval ocean lapped against the shores of Gondwana. Unbeknownst to all, in this tranquil moment, Earth's history had veered sharply in another direction. Chapter 2. The Dawn of Civilization. 2 days after the encounter between the ants and the dinosaur, on an equally sweltering afternoon, the inhabitants of the ant town felt another quake above them. When they came to the surface, they were greeted by the towering figure of a Tyrannosaurus. They recognized it straight away as the same one from 2 days ago. The Tyrannosaurus crouched down and hunted about on the ground. When it found the colony, it lifted a claw and gestured to the 2 rows of huge teeth in its gaping mouth. The ants understood the dinosaur immediately, and all 1,000 of them waved their antennae excitedly. The Tyrannosaurus put one of its forelimbs flat on the ground and allowed the ants to climb on. And just like that, the scene from 2 days ago replayed itself. The colony made a meal of the meat stuck between the dinosaur's teeth, and the dinosaur was relieved of a slight pain. For a time after that, the Tyrannosaurus routinely sought out the town of ants so they could pick its teeth. The ants could feel its footfalls from 1,000 meters away and accurately distinguish them from those of other dinosaurs. They could even tell by the sound what direction the Tyrannosaurus was moving. If it was coming toward the town, the ants rushed eagerly to the surface, with the knowledge that their food for the day was assured. Little by little, the cooperation between the enormous creature and the tiny creatures became more practiced and understood. One day, the town's residents heard the sounds of footsteps through the earthen ceiling once again. But this time was different. The footsteps they knew were mingled with unfamiliar vibrations. When the ants rushed to the surface, they saw their partner had brought along 3 other Tyrannosaurus rex and a Tarbosaurus bata. All 5 dinosaurs pointed to their teeth with their claws, requesting the ants' help. The mayor, recognizing that its forces alone were not up to the task, sent several drones post-haste to contact other ant towns in the area. Soon, 3 streams of ants came out of the trees and converged on the clearing. Over 6,000 ants assembled in total. Each dinosaur required the service of 1,000 ants, or rather, the meat between its teeth could satisfy 1,000 ants. The next day, 8 dinosaurs came to have their teeth cleaned by the ants. Over the next few days after that number increased to 10, most of them large carnivores. The dinosaurs trampled the surrounding cycads, enlarging the clearing significantly. At the same time, they also solved the food problems of a dozen ant towns in the vicinity. However, the foundation for cooperation between the 2 species was by no means secure. First, compared to the myriad hardships faced by the dinosaurs, hunger when prey was scarce, thirst when water was nowhere to be found, injuries sustained in fights with their own kind or other kinds of dinosaurs, as well as a host of fatal diseases, getting meat stuck between their teeth was a piddling discomfort. Quite a few of the dinosaurs who sought out the ants for a teeth cleaning did so out of curiosity or for a lark. On the other hand, when the dry season ended, food would become plentiful again for the ants, and they would have no need to rely on this unorthodox method of finding food. Attending those terrible banquets in the dinosaurs' mouths, so very like the gates of hell, was not something most of the ants relished. It was the arrival of a Tarbosaurus with tooth decay that marked a major step forward in the cooperation between the dinosaurs and the ants. That afternoon, 9 dinosaurs in total came to the ants to have their teeth cleaned. After the meat between its teeth had been picked clean, this particular Tarbosaurus still seemed restless. It held its forelimb high to keep the ants, who had finished their work, from leaving, and pointed insistently to its teeth with its other claw. The mayor in charge of this colony let a few dozen ants back into the dinosaur's mouth and searched the row of teeth carefully. They quickly discovered several cavities in the smooth enamel walls, each large enough to admit 2 or 3 ants side by side. The mayor went first into one of these holes, and several ants crawled in after it. They closely scrutinized the walls of the passage. The dinosaur's teeth were very hard, and anything that could tunnel through material like this was indisputably a digger that rivaled the ants themselves. As the ants felt their way forward, a black worm, twice their size, suddenly erupted from a branch passage. It had a pair of large, sharp mandibles, and with a click, it bit off the mayor's head. At the same time, more worms burst in from out of nowhere, dividing the line of ants in the tunnel, and launched a ferocious attack against them. The ants were too exhausted to defend themselves, and more than half were slaughtered in an instant. The remaining survivors struggled to break through the encirclement, but after rushing past the black worms, they became lost in the labyrinthine passages. Only 5 ants escaped the cavity, one of whom was carrying the mayor's head. An ant's head retains life and consciousness for a relatively long time after being separated from its body. Thus, when the 5 ants carried the mayor's head from the dinosaur's mouth, it explained the situation in the teeth to the 1,000 ants still standing on the forearm, and issued a final command before it died. Soon, a minuscule army of 200 soldier ants marched into the dinosaur's mouth. They cleared out the tooth the mayor had entered first. Though the soldier ants were skilled at fighting, the black worms were many times their size. Owing to their familiarity with the structure of the tunnels, the worms successfully checked the soldier ants' attack, killing a dozen ants and forcing them to retreat from the tunnel. Just as the ant army's morale began to flag, reinforcements from another town arrived. These troops were a different type of soldier ant. Though they were smaller, they could deliver devastating attacks with formic acid. The newly arrived soldier ants rushed into the tunnel, then promptly turned around, aimed their posteriors at the end.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?